So I'm going to give you a short overview of different techniques for experimental measurements, because we said that although you may want to do CFD, you have to validate at some point your simulations with some experiments. So you need to extract from a device, an experimental setup, the values of some physical quantities which are relevant for fluid mechanics. So the different measurements that you can make are associated to the physical quantities you want to evaluate. So you may want to evaluate the velocity of the fluid, okay, at some point, maybe over a plane in one direction, maybe in two directions, three directions. You may want to evaluate this velocity over time, the way it is evolving. For example, if the flow is turbulent, you want to see what are the fluctuations, maybe what is the frequency of oscillation. So you need some information about velocity, pressure, but you may want also to measure some fluxes, like for example, if you have heat and mass transfer, you want to measure what is the flux of heat, what is the flux of mass. You may want to measure the concentration. If you have a mixing device, you inject some concentration of a tracer, for example, and you want to see how it will be mixed. So you have to evaluate the temporal evolution of the concentration at some point or within your container. Okay, so there are many techniques dedicated to each physical quantity that you want to measure, and you have also many techniques for the same quantity. So for example, for measuring the velocity of a flow, there are many techniques, and again we have advantages and disadvantages. So I'm going to present a few of them, and I did here a classification. You may find some other classifications. So I decided to distinguish intrusive methods, which means that you have to insert the probe inside your device, inside your setup. And of course, the main disadvantage of that is you may perturb the flow, okay, because there is an object inside the flow. So the measurement that you will get maybe is corresponding to a flow which is not the real flow when you don't have the probe. Okay, so this is the main disadvantage of intrusive methods for flow velocity. So I'm going to talk about the hot wire and hot film, but there's other techniques like electrochemical probes. But for these techniques, so you need to insert an object inside the flow. And then for measuring flow velocity, since let's say maybe 20 years, people have developed non-intrusive methods, and they are based, for example, on optical techniques. So instead of inserting an object which is going to measure something, you are going to look with a camera or with another system, an optical system. You are going to look at something, so you measure, but you don't touch, you don't modify. Of course, it's much more acceptable, because much more suitable, because you are not going to disturb the flow. Okay. So in that category of optical techniques for flow velocity measurements, I'm going to talk about LDV, LDA, which are laser Doppler velocimetry or laser Doppler anemometry. It's almost the same. And PIV, which is becoming very popular in labs and also in the industry, because you have a full access to the flow field. Instead of having access to one point, you have access to the flow field everywhere in the laser plane, in the laser sheet. So all these techniques are based on optics. So you are going to shine the scene with a laser, and then you are going to look at something to see the motion of the flow. But there are also other techniques which are non-intrusive, like acoustics. So for example, with acoustical waves, you can also probe the flow. If you have somewhere some particles which are going to reflect acoustic waves, so you can also design some experimental techniques which are non-intrusive but based on other things than optics. It's based on acoustics. And then you have also techniques based on electromagnetic techniques if your fluid is charged. If you have some particles which are charged, then you can measure what is the motion of these particles, and then you can have an idea on the fluid motion. So these techniques are for measuring the flow velocity inside the bulk. Okay, so somewhere inside your device you want to know what is the flow velocity. Very often you need also to measure information at the walls. So you want to do, for example, the pressure which is acting on the wall. So if there are some pressure gauges, you can have also shear stress gauges, which is going to give you what is the flow stress, what is the viscous flow stress acting on that wall, and that could be important. You have also measurement techniques that are able to give you the flux of heat, because actually the shear stress is the flux of momentum. So it's a shear stress, you are going to measure a gradient of velocity, which is a flux of momentum. If you want to measure the flux of heat or the flux of mass, then there's also specific techniques for that. And then I'm going to talk briefly also of experimental methods for two-phase flows. Though then you have two different phases. One could be a liquid, the other one can be a solid, or with bubbles you have gas and liquid. And then you can find different techniques. So for example, for particles, there is one which is very famous. It's particle Doppler, phase Doppler particle analysis. So with that technique you can measure the size but also the velocity of the particle at the same time. So it's like a granulometer, which is taking advantage of the diffraction of light, but instead of just getting the particle size distribution, you get particle size distribution and the velocity at the position where you do the measurement. So it's very useful in particle suspension, in spray also, when you have a droplets formation and you want to know what is the size distribution of the droplets, but also what is the velocity of each size of droplets. Okay. And then you have other techniques based on electrical or X-ray tomography, so you can have an idea of the field of concentration in the cross section of your setup. So there are many. Probably it's not exhaustive. There are probably many more that I didn't mention, but there are many. And again, when you do, you are going to design an experimental setup and you want to measure something to understand the physics or to compare with CFD, you have to make choices. So the choices are based on different criteria. So for example, you may prefer to have intrusive or non-intrusive methods, depending on, because each methods have advantages, disadvantages. So for example, you may say, okay, non-intrusive method are of course the best, so why keep on going with intrusive method? But actually the accuracy and the temporal resolution of intrusive method are much more high. Okay, so in terms of frequency, for example, in turbulence, you cannot make LDV or PIV for very high frequency flows. So still people are keep going with a hot wire, because in terms of temporal resolution, this is the best we can get. Even if you disturb the flow, you get very strong resolution in time. So you have to deal with the intrusive or non-intrusive. You have to deal with the accuracy of the method. Are you going to make a measurement with 1%, 5%, 10% error? So of course you have to do the calibration. Again, I think this morning I warn you about the different mistakes and errors you can do with CFD. You can have the same problems with experiments. It's not because you have an experiment and you do measurement that this is the truth. If your probe is not properly calibrated and you think that the velocity is 1 meter, but actually it's 1.5 because you didn't take care about the evolution of the temperature on your sensor, so you may have also very wrong answer from experiments. So you have to take care about calibration, accuracy, resolution, and all that stuff, and you need to be trained on that as well. So accuracy is of course a big issue, because when you are going to do measurements, you want to see the error bars as small as possible. You have also to think about the resolution. So resolution is related to what I told this morning about the discretization, okay, because most of the experimental techniques are not going to give you an evolution of your quantity with a smooth variation in time. It will be discretized, okay, so you will do sampling. If you do a bit of electronics, you are going to do a sampling at 1 Hertz, 10 Hertz, 100 Hertz. So it means that although the flow is continuous, the measurement you are going to do is discontinuous, is discrete. And depending on the speed of the frequency of your phenomenon, you may lose some information if your temporal resolution or spatial resolution is not accurate. Okay, for spatial resolution, you remember that in a turbulent flow you have big and small eddies. If the volume of the measurement is bigger than the small eddies, you are also going to miss some information. So spatial and temporal resolution is going to fix the accuracy and the level of relevance of your experiments. And you have also non-scientific issues, like in CFD. In CFD, you have the choice between different options. You can code anew, but it will take time, it will take money, because you have to pay the guy in charge of coding. For experiments that will be exactly the same, there are non-scientific issues, even if the experimental technique for measuring velocity is existing with very high accuracy, very high temporal resolution. Maybe it is existing, but you don't have the money to buy it. Okay, so the cost is of course very, very, very constraining point. Okay, because all that, and specifically all the optical techniques are quite expensive actually. Okay, so I'm going to talk about that one. So hot wire. I'm not going to talk about all of them first, because that would be very long, and also because I'm not a specialist of all the techniques. I know the basis of all these techniques. So first, hot wire velocimetry. So it has been developed, let's say, probably 50 or 60 years ago. It's still improving. The idea is very simple. So you take a wire of metal. It could be tungsten, platinum, a wire of metal, and then you are going to use this wire of metal with an electric current, and this electric current is going to dissipate energy. You know, you have a law like it RI square. So this is the energy dissipated by Joule effect with an electric current within a resistance. So this is going to generate heat into your metallic wire, and this heat will be released to the fluid due to convection. Okay, so you know that when you have an object in a fluid, in a gas or in a liquid, first, if you have no flow, it will release the heat only by conduction, by diffusion. But then if you have a flow, and this is what you do when you want to cool your coffee, so you are going to blow on your coffee to enhance heat transfer. So this is the same here. We have a hot wire, and it will be cooled by the fluid. And as you increase the fluid velocity, you will increase the cooling effect. So if you make the calibration, you know what is the velocity, you measure what is the cooling effect, then you will measure, you have access to the velocity of the fluid. Okay, so there are two systems for hot wire, because you can control either the heat, the temperature of your wire, or you can control the intensity of the current which is passing through that wire. Okay, so you are going to control one and keep the other one free, and then when you keep one constant and the other one is free, it is evolving with the velocity, and then you have measurement of the velocity. Okay, so the measure is based on heat transfer due to forced convection, due to the fluid motion, and the forced convection is related to flow velocity. I'm going to show you a correlation that you can use, and this changes of the temperature of the wire is going to modify the resistance of the wire, and then you measure actually the resistance of the wire based on the what is called a Weston bridge, which is adapted, and then when you have variation of the resistance, you measure something which is proportional to the velocity. So what are the advantages and disadvantages? One of the major disadvantages of that is that you don't have access to the sign of the velocity. Because when you will blow onto that metallic wire, it could be like this, like this, like this. The heat transfer is the same actually. So the quantity of heat which is released does not depend on the direction of the flow. So this is the main drawback of this technical measurement techniques, is you are not able to discriminate the sign of the velocity or even the direction of the velocity. Of course, it needs calibration, like many of them, but that one is pretty difficult, and specifically in water. In air, it's okay, but in water, there is a bias in time which is quite difficult to control. And of course, it is intrusive, because you need to place this wire into the flow. So you see here an example of a wire with 3 components, because here you are measuring only 1 component, but here you have for 3 components, so you have 3 orientation of the wire, because of course you try to get the information when the flow is like this, because if the wire is like that and you measure like this, it's not very efficient. So you are going to orient the wire in the direction of the component of the velocity you want to measure. So you can design these probes which are able to measure the velocity in different directions, but it has some, you have to insert that in the flow, you have to insert the wire, but you have to insert the whole thing with the sticks, and you have to connect that to your current delivery machine. Okay, so you may have some perturbation in the wake, but also in front of the probe. Okay, so you may disturb the flow. This is one of the disadvantages. Why is it still used? It's because of its temporal resolution. Okay, so the temporal resolution is just based on your electronic circuit that you have, and it could be hertz, 10 hertz, 100 hertz, kilohertz, megahertz. Okay, so you may have very, very good accuracy in terms of frequency, and especially when you have a highly turbulent flow, high Reynolds number turbulent flow, you have many oscillations very quick, so you need temporal resolution to be as high as possible. So this is why it is still in use for people doing high Reynolds number flows, to understand the spectrum of the turbulence and so on. In terms of spatial resolution, also it's quite good, because the wire's diameter is very small. It could be 5-10 microns. So in terms of volume, the measurement is very localized. So these are different probes. So some of them you are going to measure only one velocity component. Here you are going to measure the 3. And then depending on the ideas of people who develop this technique, you may think that if the probe is just facing the flow, or if you are just like this, so you are going maybe to disturb less the flow. So there are different design of these probes that you can see here. Okay, so everything is based on so you are heating the system by passing a current, intensity I. The resistance of your wire is depending on the temperature. So the energy which is provided to your wire is R, the resistance, which is depending on temperature, multiplied by the intensity square. So this is what is called the Joule expression. And then what you do, as I told you, you may control either the temperature or the intensity. So let's say that you control the intensity. You have a system, an electronic system, which is able to fix exactly the intensity of the current which is passing through the wire. And then with the Weston bridge, you are going to measure the evolution in time of the resistance. This evolution in time of the resistance is depending on the temperature of the wire, and the temperature of the wire is obtained from a balance between the energy which is supplied by the electric current and the heat release due to convection. And the convection is controlled by some correlation that give you, for example, the Nusselt number, give you the heat transfer coefficient as a function of the Reynolds number. And the Reynolds number, you have the velocity inside. Okay, so if you know the heat transfer coefficient, you can measure the resistance, and you can relate the resistance to the temperature by making this enthalpy balance. Okay, so it's very easy to use, and then you can make a calibration. So you have a wind tunnel which is very well designed, where you know the velocity for different, fan velocity, and then you are going to calibrate what is the velocity for this resistance, for this resistance, for this. You have a curve like this, and then when you do the measurement, when you get measurement of the resistance, you will have the velocity of the fluid at that point, okay, with the calibration. So this is the idea of hot wire. Hot film, this is the same idea, but instead of making a measurement in the bulk, you are making a film, and then you make the measurement close to a wall, okay. And it's very popular in fluid mechanics, mostly in aerodynamics. So to get the information, you have to remember that the information of the fluid velocity that you measure is the fluid velocity at the position of your probe, of course. And for this technique to be efficient, you have to use it in a flow where there is a mean stream, okay? Because what you want, because I told you that you are unable to discriminate the direction, okay? So if you place the probe in a flow which is oscillating like this, you are not able to know if it's positive or negative. So you are going to use this method when the flow has a velocity which is always in the same direction. So the mean is in the same direction, and then you may have fluctuations around the mean. Okay, so this is what this plot is telling you. So you have turbulence, and this turbulence is transport by a mean stream, by a mean velocity flow. And then it is passing over the probe, and then you will see all the fluctuations due to the turbulence structures. Okay, so in terms of mathematics, what you will measure is at that point du by dt, the variation in time of the velocity. We know that when the flow is very convective, so dissipation is not very important, so it means that the turbulence is almost frozen and it's just moving like a solid object, and then it's passing through the probe. So we may neglect the dissipation effect. So actually we just have the convection effect, and in that convection effect, because we have a mean stream, an average velocity which is very important, so we can split that into u bar plus u prime, u bar plus u prime, and if you look at the dominant term into this expansion, so you have 4 terms because you have the product of 2 by 2. If you look at the dominant terms, it's actually the transport by the mean multiplied by the gradient of the fluctuations. So you are going to measure actually all the fluctuations of your frozen turbulence when it passes over the probe. And then you have access to this signal, and this signal you can rebuild actually the size of the vortices and everything, because it has been only transported by the flow. This is called the Taylor hypothesis. So we call it the frozen turbulence, because the turbulence is evolving, but it is convected so fast that it has no time to evolve during the measurement. Okay, so you are with the hot wire, you are going to measure temporal fluctuations, which are signature of the structure, the spatial structures of the flow, transport by a mean flow like in a wind tunnel. Okay, so this technique you have to use it only when you have a main stream and you know that the velocity will be always positive around a certain value, around a certain average, and then you will measure the fluctuations. Okay. So now I'm coming to another technique, which is one of the optical technique, LDV, LDA. So LDV, LDA. So now it's an optical technique, so you don't have anything to fit inside your system. It will be all based outside the device, outside the setup. And it's based on laser, okay? So LDV, LDA is laser Doppler velocimetry, laser Doppler anemometry. It's almost the same. So you have a laser source which is generating a laser beam, and with that laser beam you are going to shine one part of the fluid, and with another optical measurement you are going to record the intensity of light inside this laser along that laser beam. So actually what you will generate is some interferences. So you have actually one beam which is coming, and then it is split. The same beam is coming, but it has been split, and it is shining the same volume. So you have the intersection between two laser beams that will generate a volume, and in that volume, because you have two laser beams coming from the same source, the same laser source, so the light is coherent, and then you can make interference. Interference is what you see here. Okay, so you have fringes. Some of them are bright, some of them are black. So I don't know if in your undergrads you did some lectures on electromagnetics. So you have interaction of waves, and these waves are going to generate high intensity, low intensity of light. Okay, so you have these fringes, and then you see the flow with some particles which are able to reflect the light. Okay, so very tiny mirrors. Okay, you take particles which are able to reflect the light, and then when the particle is passing through this volume with a certain velocity, then you will see a blinking light, because when the particle is passing through, it will be in the light, in the dark, in the light, in the dark, in the light, in the dark. And then if you have this optical measurement, which is called a photomultiplier, it will collect the information that it is blinking. Okay, the white, black, white, black, white, black, white, black. And the frequency of the blinking is related to the velocity of the particle which is passing through this control volume, because the fringes, the distance between the fringes and the width of the fringes is controlled by your laser beam, so it is fixed. And then if the particle is moving very slowly through the fringes, you will see blinking with a low frequency. If it's passing very fast, then you will see blinking, but with a high frequency. So actually the signal that you get when the particle reflecting the light is passing through the volume of measure is like this. So there is oscillations, because the light is not constant. The intensity of light is not constant. So it will oscillate like this. And then if you look at the frequency here, and you know what is the wavelength of your fringes, there is a relation between the frequency and the velocity of travel inside the volume of measurement. And then if you know the fringes, because you know your optical system, if you measure the frequency, you have access to the velocity of the particle. Okay? For that problem, for that technique, you may have also the problem of sign, because if the particle, let's say, is moving from the bottom to the top, it will be blinking at a certain frequency. But if it's coming from the top to the bottom, that will be also blinking with the same frequency if the velocity is the same. So you are not able to discriminate positive and negative velocities. So there is another system that you can add, and it's called the Bragg cell. And what is going to happen is that these fringes, instead of being steady, they are going to slide with a certain velocity. They are going to slide. Okay, let's say they are sliding from the bottom to the top. Okay, so they slide with a certain velocity which is fixed by all the optical technique. And then when you have a particle which is passing now across that fringes which are not steady, they are sliding. So you will see a difference if the velocity is in the same direction or in the opposite direction, because that will increase or decrease the frequency of blinking. And then you are able now to discriminate particles which are going from the bottom to the top, or particles which are going from the top to the bottom because of this sliding of the fringes. So this is what is done by the Bragg cell. So you can discriminate positive and negative velocity. Okay, so you see it's very simple to use. And actually it is called laser Doppler, but there's no Doppler effect. So I don't know why the guys talk about Doppler, there's no Doppler effect. The only thing that could be related to Doppler is maybe when you have the Bragg cell, but even that it's not really Doppler. But okay, people decided to call it like this. So what are the advantages and disadvantages? Disadvantage, it is an optical technique, so you need to see, you need to observe the scene. So you cannot use it with opaque fluids, okay? Because if you shine an opaque fluid with a laser, that will be stopped at the surface, okay? So you must use it only with transparent fluid, because you need to shine it with a laser, you need a camera, you need to see these fringes. They are very small, but you need a camera, you need something, okay? So you can only use it with transparent fluid. So compared to that one, you can use it even if you don't see what is happening in the flow. So for opaque flow, opaque fluid, you can use the hot wire, okay? So transparent fluid. The problem is that you have discontinuous measurement of the velocity, because let's say that the flow is seeded with your many small particles, but to get the velocity, you need particles to pass through this volume of measurement. If the seeding of your system is not large enough, you don't have any particles coming through this volume, and then you don't have any data. So maybe during 1 second, all the particles are moving, there's no information, and then suddenly one particle is passing, and then you get the velocity at that time. And then you wait, and then another particle is coming, and you have again some information about the velocity. So when you are using this technique, usually you have signals of velocity which are like this. So you have, let's say it's v as a function of t. So you will have information, and then you have a blank, and then again information, and then again information. Okay, but in between it's because during that time there is no particles passing through the volume of measurement. And then you need some signal analysis technique to rebuild the flow evolution. But when you do that, of course, you do errors, because you are going to fill gaps with information that you don't have. Okay, so you are going to make interpolation, extrapolation. So you are going to feed the system with new information that you actually don't have. Okay. Compared to the hot wire, with the hot wire, the measurement is continuous, because you have continuously a current through the wire. The only constraint is your electronics. If you have an electronic system which is able to go to 10 Hertz, 100 Hertz, 1 megahertz, 100 megahertz, it's only based on your electronics. The measurement is continuous. Okay. Here the measurement is intrinsically unsteady, non-continuous. Okay. The spatial resolution also is not very accurate, because the size of this is about, let's say, from 1 to 2 millimeters to 1 to 2 millimeters. So it's about 1 to 2 millimeter cube, compared to that where the probe are few microns. Okay, so you see this technique, you are going to integrate the information on a volume which is few millimeters cube. Okay, so this is also a constraint. So for very high Reynolds number flows, usually people are not using that technique, they prefer the other one. But for some, let's say, gentle flows, that could be a very nice technique, because you are not going to modify the flow. Okay, so now I'm moving to another technique, which is PIV. So it's also a technique based on optical measurements. So now the new step is With LDV, you have measurement, let's say, in one point where the two laser beams are intersecting. So you have a measure in one point in time, but you know that the flow is evolving everywhere, and you would like to have access to the flow field everywhere into the device. One slice, okay? So one snapshot of the flow field in a plane, horizontal plane or vertical plane. So this is the idea of PIV. So PIV is particle image velocimetry. It is also an optical technique. It is based again on a laser. So with a laser you are going to generate a laser sheet, a plane, to shine the scene, to shine your setup. And within that plane you will seed it again with particles which are reflecting the light. So you will see with the camera some white and black dots. So maybe I have one better like this. Okay, so maybe you see better here. So you will see white, so you see black and white dots. So it's like if you look at the stars in the sky during the night. So you see points which are reflecting the light of the laser sheet. And the idea is, if these particles are moving, it's because the flow around is also moving. Okay, so you are going to correlate the motion of these small particles with the motion of the fluid. So maybe you can make a comment on that. Do you think is it relevant to use the motion of particles as an indication of the flow field? What must be the assumption and then the constraint on the choice of the particle? Do you think that we can use any types of particles to do these PIV or LDV measurements? How do you select the particles? What do you think?
The Reynolds number should be very less, and it should be a streamlined flow so that it can be averaged over a region.
Yeah, but in terms of particles, how do you select? Let's say I give you a bunch of particles, you know, from 1 micron, 2 micron, 10 micron, 100 micron, 1 millimeter, 1 centimeter, maybe 10 centimeter. Will you choose any of them? So do you prefer the particles which have a large time scale? Not sure.
Depends on reflectivity of the particles.
You mean the reflectivity? Yeah, of course. You are going to take particles able to reflect. Okay, this is for sure. But in terms of sizes, would you prefer big particles or small particles? Small. If you take big, first they are going to settle. Okay, so at some point you feed your system with particles, you do the experiments, and after 10 seconds all the particles are at the bottom. You don't see anything in your field. Okay, so first you cannot take the big particles. If we take particles which are a bit smaller, they will be suspended in the flow. But if they have, as you proposed, a long time scale, it means, remember, the Stokes number will be very high, so they are not going to respond to the fluid. So they are going to have trajectory. They are going to have a trajectory which is different from the fluid evolution. And don't forget that you want to measure not the velocity of the particle, but the velocity of the fluid. So the particle you want to use are particles which are following as close as possible the fluid streamlines. So you are going to choose particles with a very low Stokes number. And then the choice will be the smallest particle as possible. If they are too small, then they cannot reflect a lot of light. So this is the constraint. So we are going to take as small particle as possible, but they need to be big enough to blink and to give you the signal of light to be able to see that with a camera or with a microscope. Okay? But you prefer to take the very small particles, and also you are going to try to match the density. Because even if you take small particles, they are going to settle under gravity. So let's say if you have air and you take particles of metals, even if they are small, they are going to settle. So you are going to measure the velocity of the particle, and then you have a component which is along the gravity, but in your flow you don't have any component along the gravity. Gravity has nothing to do with the flow. So you are going to bias to flow your experiment. Okay, so we are going to try to select particles as small as possible, not too small to be able to see them, and with a density as close as possible to the fluid. So they will follow exactly the fluid streamlines, like passive tracers. Okay, and sometimes it's not very easy to find them, and it's quite costly actually. So in water, for example, we try to have density matching. So you are sure that you don't have any settling effect on the settling bias on your experiment. In air, it's difficult. In air, you cannot find any solid particles having the same density as air. It's only one. So we take very, very, very fine particles, but we know that they are not going to follow exactly the flow. And for sure, we must avoid particles which have a Stokes number close to 1. Because you remember, when the Stokes number is close to 1, they are going to make clusters. So first, they are not going to seed the flow evenly, and then you are going to measure some structures of the flow, which is not the flow field. You are going to measure the zones of accumulations. Okay, so you have to be careful with that. So what is the technique? The technique is you take an image, like stars in the sky during the night, and with your laser, you shine the scene, and with the camera you record that with a certain frequency. Okay, so you take maybe one image, 1 frame per second, 10 frames per second, 100 frames per second, and then you have doublet of images. Okay, so let's say that on the first image you see the black dots. On the second image you see the white. So these are the same, of course, but you have 2 images, and then you compare the 2 images. So the first technique is called particle tracking velocimetry, and this is when you have few dots in your image. So then you are able to say that the black one was at time 1 and the white one was at time 2. And then you see the displacement, you know the delta t between the 2 images, you know the displacement, so you know the velocity at that point. Okay, so particle PTV, particle tracking velocimetry, is very simple. You take an image, you see your dots, your light reflected by the particles. You take another images, just few milliseconds, few microseconds later, and then the particles have moved. Okay, they have moved, and then based on that, the velocity. So the velocity is delta x over delta t. Okay, so it's very easy. You track the particles, and then here you can see the velocity field. Okay, that's fairly easy, but you can make it only when you have few particles in the image, because if you have many, okay, so if you have many, okay, you have many particles. On the next frame, you have also many, but you are unable to say if this particle, which was here at that time step, is now here or here or here, because there are too many. Okay, so you are unable to correlate the first particle with the initial first particle, second one with second one. Okay, so when you have many particles, you cannot use particle tracking velocimetry, and you do particle image velocimetry. And then the idea now is how can I use an image with many particles to evaluate locally the velocity. So for particle tracking, it's done almost by hand. So you have with a computer, you can detect that particle, you have the velocity. For PIV, you are going to use some statistical analysis, which is called cross correlation. So you are going to look for the correlation between that image and the next image few milliseconds later, but you are not going to look at individual particles one by one. You are going to look at the pattern. Okay, so it's like a texture. You are going to you want to evaluate how this pattern has been transported to the next image, and it's based on cross correlation. So you are going to do a fast Fourier transform to evaluate a correlation function, and then you are going to search. So let's say that, so this is the image that you have here, so with many particles. So you see that on that image I'm completely unable to say that this particle is now here or here. So I'm going to select part of the image, and so this is the sub image, like 32 pixel over 32 pixels. So you see that you have a certain pattern, so with a particle here and there. And on that image, because in terms of time elapsed, it's very short, so it's 1 millisecond, 1 microsecond. So the particle has moved somewhere. The structure is almost the same. It has just been translated somewhere, but you don't know where. Okay, so you are going to, so you take your image, you sample it with the same size square, and then you move it along your image, and you make cross correlation with the first image. So cross correlation will tell you if there is a resemblance, if there is a accordance between this initial pattern and the one that you detect into the second image. And when you do this cross correlation, so it will be with 2 dimensions because you will move it along X and along Y. And when you see a peak in your cross correlation, it means that this is the exact location where there is the most accordance of pattern matching. Okay? And then you know that the displacement of your object based on this peak of cross correlation is a certain vector, and based on the vector, again, you are going to define the velocity as the distance divided by the time step, the time elapsed between the 2 frames. Okay? So in terms of the concept, the idea is not very complex. You need to use this 2D correlation, but you can find it's built in MATLAB. There's no problem. But the idea is completely different from the PTV. Okay, PTV is really, let's say, natural in the sense that you want to look at the flow fluid based on the motion of individual particles. Here you are going to look. You want to look at the transport of a pattern, and you are trying to make pattern matching between that image and that image, and you do that for all the squares. Okay, so I did it here, but you can select these sub images at each position into your plane, and then you will get, for each square, you will get a velocity. So finally you end up with a flow field like this. Each vector corresponds to one panel where you have a certain pattern which has moved for a certain distance between T1 and T2. And then you see that you have, within one measurement, you have access to the full flow field within a plane, horizontal plane, vertical plane. So it's much, in terms of information, you have much more than the LDV, because with the LDV, you have the measure at one point, but you don't know what is going on at another point. So you have to move your beam, make another measurement, but it will not be synchronized. Okay, so you have to make only statistics. Here you will see really the motion of the flow, because that could be also resolved in time if you make many frames like this. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about a technique related to the measurement of mixing. Okay, for example, in two-phase flow. So you want to evaluate the concentration. So here, this is an example you see of visualization of the flow and the measurement of the flow with PIV. Okay, so you see exactly what is the flow structures, you have the velocity field, and then you can compare that with CFD because you have the same information, you have the flow field at some time steps. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about mixing. So I want to know what is the efficiency of a system to mix. So for example, if you inject dye into turbulence, you want to know how the dye is going to be mixed within your process. So there is a technique which is called PLIF, so it's planar laser induced fluorescence. So you are going to seed your system with a passive tracer that has the property to give light in a different wave number than the laser. Okay, so let's say you shine this material with green and it will emit in red, for example. It has the property to fluoresce. Okay, so this is fluorescence. So this is the image you can get. So this is, remember the Taylor-Couette device that I presented this morning, so with a cylinder, and we were interested into the mixing within that system because we have turbulence. So this is the images that you can get. Okay, so you shine your system with a laser, so that will insulate the molecules of your fluorescent dye, and with a camera which is perpendicular to your plane, you will get the information about the intensity of the light which is fluorescing from your dye. And of course the intensity is proportional to the local concentration of your passive tracer. So you can have access here at very nice pictures like this, where you see that where it is red, it is high concentration, and where it is black, it's zero concentration. And then when you record that over time, you will see the mixing process and all the flow structures which are generating this stretching and mixing of the concentration. And you can also couple that because you use the laser, so you can couple that with PIV. So you can do both simultaneously. So you can measure the concentration, and with another camera you can seed the flow with many particles to measure also the velocity field, and then you have the full access to the flow field and the concentration, and then you can have an idea of the effect of turbulence on mixing because you have both the information on the flow dynamics and the concentration dynamics. Okay, so this is the type of setup that we have in the lab. So this is the Taylor-Couette columns. Here you have the laser, you have the cooling system of the laser, two cameras in front which are looking at the scene in between, and both of them are going to record at the same time the information on the concentration and the information on the flow field, and then you can try to understand what is the physics of mixing in that experiment. So to give you an idea of prices, because I told you that the cost is one issue, so the price of the laser is about 200,000 euros. The price of one camera is about 50,000 euros. The price of the lens is about 10,000 euros. So you see we have, so the cost is an issue. And even the particles, I didn't say that, but even the particles that you use, if you take a few millimeters of them, it could be 2,000 or 3,000 euros. So we recycle them. So when you finish the experiment, we sieve them, we dry them to keep them for the next experiment, because you see it's few millimeters and it's 2,000-3,000 euros. So it's very expensive.
I would buy diamond particles rather than your particles.
I'm sorry?
I would buy diamond.
Yes, for your wife. Very often I'm thinking that here I have, let's say, I don't know, 20 or 50 times the price of my car. The problem is with the laser I cannot commute from my house to the lab.
What sort of particles are they?
So for PIV in a liquid, usually we are using hollow glass particles. So to match the density, because if you take glass particles, so glass is good because it will reflect the light. But if you take glass in water, for example, the density is 2 point something for the glass. The water is only 1. So what we use is hollow glass particles. So there's nothing inside. And then we can match almost exactly the density of these hollow glass particles with the density of the fluid.
Can you use silicates?
Yes, yeah.
Then I can give you one source, that is your Sinosphere. Sinosphere's density is around 0.56.
Okay.
That you get in the, say, actually the fly ash pond.
Yeah. We are some people are using silicates or mica. You know, this.
No, the Sinospheres are much cheaper than this. And you have got a density of around 0.56.
Yeah.
And its international rate is $1,500 per ton.
Okay. So that could be much. Yeah. But the point is also to have calibrated particles, because you want to be sure that they are going to follow exactly the same the same flow field. So with that you have very nice and interesting experiments, but this is like CFD. Okay, so you will have very nice pictures, very nice movie, but all that information, because you are going to, with that, so I don't remember, by my students, it was a girl, she generated 100 gigabytes of data. Okay, so, and with that, okay, what do you do? So you have to, like in CFD, where you get many information about the flow, you have movies, you have colors. Here it is the same. It's like CFD, you have many information, but now the improvement and the added value is from the fluid mechanics people, from the physics people, to understand what is the value of that measurement in terms of statistics, in terms of modeling, in terms of many things. Okay, generating data is not big.
So what was your interest in this flow?
So the interest, so the story was, so it is related to nuclear power safety. So actually they have a plant where they want to extract plutonium from, to recycle the plutonium or the uranium. And for doing that, they extract that through liquid-liquid extraction. So it's a chemical engineering process to extract one solute from the with a solvent. Okay, and this extraction is strongly related to the transfer between droplets and liquid. And then depending on the mixing that you have around, the flux and the mass transfer coefficient is changing a lot. And in their process modeling, they were saying it is constant, whatever the flow Reynolds number. Okay, so they decided to try to understand a bit better the physics, and then we did experiments at different Reynolds number to see what is the effect of turbulence on mixing, trying to evaluate what is called the axial diffusion coefficient to plug into their chemical engineering models. So based on that, we were able to quantify the mixing intensity depending on the Reynolds number, depending on the flow structure, and then based on that they were able to improve the capacity of prediction of their chemical engineering model for some industrial applications. And at some point, so I don't have the slide, but the next step was to place particles inside. Because when you have particles into the liquid, they are going to collide, so they are going to generate fluctuation, then that will enhance the mixing efficiency. So the last study we did was to look at the mixing that you can see here, but with particles. What is the enhancement by the presence of a solid particle in suspension? And then we have again a new technique because we have to match the index, the refractive index with and the density. So that was a very complex experiment, but we obtained some interesting results. Okay, so I'm going to finish on that panel. So you see the mixing. So I go back to the initial panel where. So I'm not going to talk about all of them. So you have a list here, so you can find on Google many information, but also keep in mind that doing experiments is very difficult. You have to validate your system, you have to calibrate your system, you have to be sure that the quantity that you measure is really significant, so that there's no mismatch between what you expect and what you measure. And also you have to think about that making measurements is useless if you don't know what to do with that. Okay, so you need a background in statistics, in physical analysis to take the added value from the experiments or from the CFD to understand better the physics and the modeling and trying to answer to some industrial questions. Okay, so the last slide I would like to show is the master program that we have, which is based on almost on all these aspects. So I'm doing research, but as you can see, I'm also teaching. I'm also a professor, so I have many students at different levels, bachelor and master. And we have developed over the last 6 years a master program for foreign students. Okay, so we have our French students, and then we give lectures in French. But when we have foreign students, so we gather all the foreign students who are interested in fluid mechanics for industrial processes in the same batch, and then we teach in English to that students. So we have students from India, we have students from China, from South America, from Africa, from the Middle East, some of them from Europe as well, and we give the lectures in English. And the topic is fluids engineering for industrial processes. So all of you might be at some point interested. So it is 2 years. So in France the master is 2 years. We give lectures about different scientific topics like heat and mass transfer, multi-phase flows, modeling of turbulence, in the spirit of using this knowledge for different industrial applications related to mechanical, chemical, and petroleum engineering. Okay, so that will be also available in the package that you will get. Okay, so you will get all my lectures, and then you will see that slide. If you need information, so feel free to contact me. And because we have some agreement with some universities in the world, we can offer you some scholarship to reduce the cost, because also for studies the cost is one of the important issues. Okay, so thanks to all of you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the lectures, and I'm open for the discussion and questions.